35. Lights are extinguished. Author's note. A short chapter by my standards, and very much a bridge between what happened previously and the events of the next chapter, which will be all action, setting the stage for the big showdown. Many thanks to everyone who helped make this chapter brilliant. GJ Mega, JDH41, Costin, and Mayak. As in a theatre, the lights are extinguished, for the scene to be changed with a hollow rumble of wings, with a movement of darkness on darkness, and we know that the hills and the trees, the distant panorama and the bold imposing facade are all being rolled away. T. S. Eliot, it's bad, sir, very bad. The aura said softly, and his pallor was green. Rufus Scrimgeour tightened his lips. Media. Haven't been informed yet. It was called in by the neighbors an hour ago. Broken door, wards down. They knew it was old Crouch's place, sent a flu message. My partner and I came out, and we found it. Rufus knew well what trauma would cause a wizard to refer to a dead body, isn't it? And it would seem he would witness it once again, as he had not since the war. Ward the area. Keep the reporters away if they show up. No statements until I say so. His aura nodded quickly and stepped away, relieved to not be asked to enter the house again. Rufus stepped up to the porch of the elegant home that was the residence of Bartemius Crouch SR. The door hung off its hinges. Blasting charm, based on the spread of splinters and the amount of damage. Rufus stepped through into a hallway that looked serene and peaceful. The living room, however, was not. What remained of Crouch SR? And one, perhaps two, house elves were strewn across the area, slivers of flesh and bone, all sliced in exacting detail. The work of hours, Rufus thought, his stomach clenching. This wasn't a simple killing. It had been done by someone in revenge, cold, furious revenge. The kind that sits and simmers for an age. The kind that takes its time to do its work. Rufus looked long enough to confirm it was indeed Crouch. Then he turned his back to the carnage and closed his eyes, breathing deeply, ignoring the stench of pain and blood as he thought furiously. His former boss, Pillywickle, had spent the last days of his career claiming that the Death Eater Rosier was still alive. The old man had even compiled an entire file, random muggle slayings, mostly women, that ranged across the entire British Isles and European continent, all bearing the same trademark, the thin slashes from a spelled thread sharp as a knife. This scene wasn't exactly the same. He had seen glimpses of other damage as well, hinting that more than one wizard was involved in the murder. But the entire thing stank of Evan Rosier, and Pillywickle had passed away in his sleep 3 years ago and could offer no insight. Evan Rosier had been killed by Alastair Moody, but his father had never been found, and his father had also never used the wire spell, which was Evan's own macabre invention. With gritted teeth, Rufus left the scene. He would need to talk to Moody. He would have to inform the press. He would have to speak to Fudge. Why did this have to happen now? Now that things with the muggles were coming to light, when they hadn't yet displaced Fudge, had only just set the wheel in motion to do so. This would be a blow, one they desperately could not afford. After speaking to Creature about closing up Grimmauld Place until Sirius returned, Harry went directly to Hermione. He had offered the Black Elf the choice to stay at the Black Manor or relocate to Hallamsund, where he had finished configuring the wards. The elf had decided to stay, which was no surprise to him. It was no longer late in the night, but early in the morning. Harry did not bother trying to figure out what time it actually was, not after jumping around Britain most of the night. Instead, he went directly to the room where Hermione slept and rapped on the door. He heard movement within before a sleepy Hermione opened the door and stared blearily at him. "Harry," she whispered, brows furrowed. He didn't waste time. Harry reached out and pulled her into an embrace, resting his forehead on her shoulder as he whispered words into her mind. "I'm tired." Hermione hesitantly placed her arms around him. What happened? He told her about Sirius, then about Hannah and the things he has seen in a rush of memory. I moved through her mind like I would take a walk through the forest. I could see everything she was, her mistakes and problems, the way she felt about James, about Sirius. She loves him. I can see what love is now, and that is it. She showed me that, putting someone else above yourself, even if it means losing them forever. I didn't tell Sirius any of it, just that she was trustworthy. It was private, and what I saw was something I should never have seen. Harry pulled back slightly, looking down to meet Hermione's eyes. She was crying when I pulled away. I hurt her without meaning to, made her relive things she had tried to forget. Hermione lifted her chin in stubborn denial. She asked you to do so, and it was the best way to make sure she wasn't lying. You were protecting Sirius and her as well by removing any doubt. Harry sighed at her words and leaned down again, resting against her with a weary sigh. They are moving to Hallamsund. For now. I need to visit Gringotts in a few days, figure out what property might work for them to stay in, further away from the reach of the hounds. I already know the Potter Villa in Spain is out of the question. Its anti-muggle wards are ancient. It's the only other place I visited when searching for a place to put Care and the others before going to Australia. He felt Hermione nod. For a long minute he stood there, soaking in the warmth. But when she began to shift her weight, he pulled back with a long sigh and spoke aloud. I'm going to bed. I'll probably miss the morning study session in the library. Hermione shrugged and then shooed him away. Go on. You haven't slept at all tonight. I'll let Dylan know. Harry nodded, and with one last look at his tousled friend, turned back to his own room. Hermione placed the large book back with a gentle push before taking a deep breath of the Durmstrang Library's air. She loved it. She thought she might like it even more than Hogwarts. The selection was certainly more vast. But the smell of old books, leather and parchment and dust made her feel at home even when she definitely was not. She smiled brightly to herself as she slowly walked along the stacks of books, eyeing the titles in purely random order, waiting for something new to pop out and look interesting. She was done studying one particular topic. After the fiasco with the first task, she had made herself a deal. Instead of reading what she felt she ought to read, she would only read what she wanted to read for at least a week. Get over the bad taste in her mouth that had lingered since being placed dead last in the competition, a blow to both her pride and her sense of fairness. Her eyes snagged on a title. Large, garish letters emblazoned a black leather-bound tome that seemed set apart from its fellows. Hermione lifted her wand and waved it, intoning the words for the translation spell Griffin had taught them all months before. She was nearly good enough at it, now she may be able to cast it wordlessly. The title formed. Hexes to Jinxes, her brow knit. Did that mean it was a book about how to hex or jinx people, a simple list of hexes and jinxes, a book on pranks in general, or perhaps far more interesting, the difference between the two? She reached for the book. Erminy, the sound of a voice far too close, nearly made her jump out of her skin. She whirled, wide eyes taking in a person she never expected to see, at least not this close and looking at her. Victor Crumb. She blinked at him. He fidgeted. Hello. His voice was formal, his stance ramrod straight. Hermione hesitatingly smiled at him, uncertainty in her voice as she responded. Hello. Victor stared a moment longer than was polite before looking at the bookshelf and back again. Then, to her surprise, the man simply turned and walked away. She watched him go in complete confusion before looking at the black book. With a shrug, she grasped the book and carried it under one arm as she moved further down the stacks. James looked over the 7 men with avid eyes. Their uniforms were grey, the thin padded armor resembling standard issue, if not for its silvery grey appearance, and what James knew rested inside those silver fibers. Pub. Wilson had done well, splendidly, amazingly. He had managed to manufacture the armor in half the time James had expected, and without yet tipping off the wolves circling around them all, ravenous to take a bite. Nathan stood beside him, a silent cloud of disapproval. His aide was beginning to annoy him, the man's pacifist views, his sympathy for the magical race. I think I'll call them Greyhounds, our own private response team, James said cheerfully, facing the grey-clad men. Nathan looked towards the men, then away. Appropriate. The man murmured, and James's annoyance spiked higher. Yes, I think so, he said brightly, holding his temper in check. Let the man mope. Let him sit and be weak. He would be glad for the defensive measures when the time came. When the greyhounds were all that stood between themselves and certain death from Spelfer. I want them all trained in combat tactics, especially those to be used against wizards. Take advantage of the wizards' weaknesses and our own defense. James said the last to a slim young man who waited by the other armored men. The man nodded, his youthful eyes cold and vacant. James knew the man's story and knew that his Me-6 background would be particularly useful in a trainer. His greyhounds would be prepared, when the time came, ready to mobilize at a moment's notice when the wizards finally made a move. It was nearly time. 6 months, if his calculations were correct. Enough time for training in this God-forsaken war bunker they had retrofitted for use as a hiding hole. Enough time for Me-5 to turn its eyes elsewhere to some other crisis. Then they would need only draw the wizards out to face them in the light of day, and let everyone see them for what they were. Emma Noel was at a loss. She glanced down once more at the letter in her hands, her own writing glaring back at her. Deliver this envelope to James at any cost. It may win victory for us. This is not a trick by wizards. It is insurance only. Trust yourself. Trust that you knew what you were doing when you agreed to this. Remember Dad. It was all the note said. Short, too short, no explanation given. Emma had tossed and turned for a week. Sure, it must be some trick regardless of her own words. Certain there was no reason she would agree to some sort of memory wipe of her own volition. How could it not be wizards if her memory was gone? Surely no normal drugs could do that, right? Or could they? She researched it on the internet. There were indeed drugs that could make one forget entire hours worth of time. She found herself facing a quandary. Did she trust what she had written? Could she risk their movement for the possibility of victory? In the end, she had no choice. James was gone, all the old haunts abandoned. The hounds that remained could no more reach James than she. He had gone to ground. Unless he resurfaced, she would be unable to deliver the letter anyway. So she hid it, deep in the back of her own safe, and tried to forget the decision she would have to make when James returned. Harry walked through the halls of Gringotts without a pause. He had been back to his vaults several times since his first meetings with the goblin who managed his family's finances, though most correspondence was by owl. Griffook had no patience with Harry or wizards in general, but they respected one another, and Griffook was happy to make Harry richer if he would just stay out of the goblin's way. So Harry did. He had neither the time or the inclination to bother with managing the vast estates the Potter family had, and what remained of the Blacks was so disorganized and ill-managed that as far as he was concerned, the goblin could have at it, which was why he would need to go into Gringotts to look over the list of properties that he owned. All the paperwork was filed there, and in the last year Griffook may have made new investments and sold off unfavorable ones. At the end of the long row of booths where goblin tellers waited, the corridor that led to the separate offices was flanked by 2 goblin guards, both dressed in elaborate metal armor. Harry met their scowling gaze with cold neutrality. Jip's hook in hand. Harry said simply. The one of the left sniffed. The one of the right might have smiled, or might have just bared his teeth in disdain. It was hard to tell. Pass. The one who sniffed said in a high-pitched order. Harry moved on, conscious of eyes at his back. He was more than aware that his presence had been noted, though the bank was crowded with the mid-morning rush. He had hoped to be lost in the busy crowd with his generic black robe and simple clothes. But he had been noticed the minute he walked in the large grand door. He had seen a witch stare at him, another begin talking excitedly. He had no doubt that within an hour most of Diagon Alley would be aware that Harry Potter had been inside Gringotts when the Daily Prophet had just cheerfully announced his presence that Sunday at the Durmstrang Institute's first task, and the Academy's subsequent failure. Well, it would give the Ministry something to think about, at least. He wasn't aware there was any rule that said the students must remain within Durmstrang during the tournament, but transportation was limited, and the other students probably had no way out on their own anyway without using the school flues or apparition point. Harry came to Griffook's office, his eyes going over the 2 family names outside the door, lingering on Black. If Sirius was freed in his trial in January, that would mean Griffook might no longer manage the Black estate. Harry hoped it wouldn't bother the goblin overmuch. Harry rapped thrice on the door, banging forcefully on the thick wooden surface to increase the chance of the goblin hearing. He was rewarded when it swung open of its own accord, a squat and wrinkled Griffook peering at him over a stack of papers. The goblin bared his teeth in a sneer. His voice, when it spoke, was not like the high-pitched guard, but deep and rumbling, full of savage intensity. Mr. Potter, to what do I owe the pleasure? Harry smiled and entered, closing the door behind him with a gentle push. He walked toward the elaborate chairs in front of the goblin's elevated desk and fell into one, sprawling out with a comfortable sigh. Can a wizard not check up on his investments without interrogation? Harry said idly. Griffook looked at him over the rim of gold wire spectacles. I assume you have received your quarterly owl. As the documents last sent to you returned signed regarding the buying of stock in Regetta Ali, I can only hope you have done your due diligence regarding your finances. Harry raised a brow. My due diligence? You mean staying out of your way? Griffook tapped a long, pointed black nail on his desk. Exactly. Harry snorted, then laughed, straightening in his chair. I won't waste your time. I need to go over the updated list of properties the Potters own. Griffook's eyes narrowed. Commercial or residential? Harry blinked, then waved a hand. Residential. Griffook did not question. He only rose and stepped off of his goblin chair, an odd configuration of padded couch and stairs, to move towards the stone wall. With a series of taps, the stone quickly began to move before a compartment slid open. Griffook retrieved a large book from inside, and with a gesture sent it spiraling towards his desk as he resumed his perch atop the chair. With rapid flips of his fingers, the goblin opened the book and turned pages, a quill clasped in one finger as he made notes upon a parchment beside him. Within mere minutes, the goblin closed the book with a delicate motion and regarded him with black eyes. I have focused primarily on the facets of your estate that make money and therefore need a watchful eye. All of your real estate, that house businesses have been brought to order, a process that takes a great deal of time and effort, as I have stated in my letters to you. Harry only nodded. He had read the letters, some so long they unraveled and fell to the floor in his hands, listing detailed addresses, and sums as the goblin tediously documented every move he made with obvious pride. Griffook had a right to be proud. With the percentage the goblin made off the profits, he had to be extremely wealthy himself. Griffook continued, but the residential properties are untouched. He tapped the parchment. The ruin at Godric's Hollow remains. There is the townhouse on Hallamsund, listed as your personal residence. A house in Condonin, Australia, your secondary address. The house in Heliopolis requires no upkeep other than the scheduled stipend for the 3 house elves present on the property, its last inspection by yourself a year ago. The flats in Calais and Valencia had their wards renewed by contractors 7 and 5 years ago, respectively, and remain vacant unless you desire to rent them out. A wise move, as both are located within their city's wizarding alleys. I meant to mention this move via our next owl. No house elves present on either property. Harry had not paid much attention when he was in both France and Spain on his search for the wolfsbane potion, or before that, when searching for a place to put the steals. But neither flat would work to hide Hannah in, as they were doubtless within the anti-muggle ward around the wizard areas. He sighed. That's fine. What else is there? Griffook smiled with a flash of sharp pointed teeth, looking satisfied, and continued. A vacation property in Greece, where it is noted the remainder of the Potter house elves from Godric Hollow were relocated. 4, in total, reside there, receiving their stipend for food and supplies for general maintenance of the house. Well, there goes that one, Harry thought with an inward groan. Griffook tapped the paper again as he continued speaking. No current inspection, last renewal of the wards during your father's time. It seems their last visit was during their honeymoon, and it was noted several repairs were scheduled to be made to the exterior of the house. No note that it was done. I suggest, when you have the time, you inspect it personally. Harry felt a slight pain in his chest. The thought of visiting a place his mother and father had been in during a far happier time was not something he relished. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers before speaking. What else? Griffook grumbled under his breath at Harry's lack of appropriate response to what he thought a very pertinent issue. Then the goblin continued. Last is an apartment in New York, in the United States. Last lived in by one of your great uncles, now deceased. The Potters had business with the North American Bureau, whose headquarters are based in another nearby city. You also own several lucrative stocks in businesses in the area, all of which have seen a profit. Those that did not have been liquidated. Harry sat up. Is it in the wizarding side? Griffook sneered. It is a muggle area. There is no dedicated alley in New York, only several wizarding towers whose appearance blends with the muggle buildings. Your own investments reside in these, if you wish to know more. Harry only shook his head. This apartment, where is it? And are there any wards or elves there? The goblin's wrinkled skin creased further in displeasure. Then he opened the book at his side again, and with a harsh word the pages flipped of their own accord before coming to rest on a certain page. Griffook began to speak, his eyes roaming the pages. The wards have not been renewed in 2 decades, and they were only standard protection spells. What remains is probably non-functional. No house elves, though it is listed as being under a cleaning contract, with no further information given. As this money is still being paid regularly for the service, I assume it is still active. It is furnished, storing a list of what is doubtless now antique furniture. It appears this potter lived well. The goblins sounded approving. Harry waited as he continued to speak. No paintings or magical artifacts listed as being on the property, besides a few enchanted baubles. It is apartment 13 on the 13th floor. Harry blinked. It also appeared that Potter had a sense of humor. In the Cullifer building of New York City, New York. Griffook finished, and then looked at Harry expectantly. Harry sat back in his chair and thought. You couldn't get further away from London than across the ocean. In fact, he couldn't think of any reason James would even think to look for her there. If it was indeed a muggle area, and had little magical about it, then it might be the perfect place to stash the woman in safety and still keep her away from Australia and his family. Harry came to his feet in sudden decision, meeting Griffook's black eyes. What's the time difference between here and the States? Amy waited in the elevator, her head idly nodding to the beat pumping from the headphones positioned in her ears. Across from her and her cleaning cart, a tall man in a perfect black suit gave her a narrow, snooty glance, and she fought the desire to stick her tongue out at him. McAllister's cleaning service had quite a few clients in this building, and every one of them was just like the man in the suit. Arrogant jerks. Leave a speck of dust in the place, and there would be hell to pay. Amy had cartoned on quick to the need to simply ignore the tenants and pretend she was in an entirely different world. Hence the headphones and the early hour. All of the apartments that McAllister's had under contract, each privately owned, were lived in by businessmen who were up and gone by 6 on a weekday. Amy preferred to time it perfectly so that she would arrive after they were gone. She was personally responsible for the weekly cleanings of the 36 clients in the upper-class building on the east side of Manhattan, a feat she had gained after 3 years with a perfect record. Jimmy McAllister himself had given her the promotion and raise to the jealousy of her older co-workers. Not that she wanted to clean forever. One day she would manage her own cleaning business, and she was working for the degree at night to help get her there. The elevator opened, and the suited man bustled off on the 3rd-floor cafe and bar before rising again, empty now. Amy leaned against the cool metal wall and waited. When it reached the 13th floor, she pushed the collapsible cleaning cart off and strode forward, eyes on her first client of the day, and the only one that broke the mold. For one, it was the oldest client McAllister's had. Old Mr. McAllister himself had just started in the business and signed on with Mr. Potter before she was even born. And every week for the last 25 years, McAllister's had sent someone in to clean, and 20 of them had been of an abandoned apartment. Amy thought Mr. Potter was probably dead. After all, no one had seen the slightest evidence of the man since he signed the contract, and the apartment itself was decidedly odd. The furniture was old, and by old she meant ancient. Elegant wooden tables and chairs, ornate shelves, odd knickknacks and sparkling sculptures lining them. The sofa looked about ready to fall into dust, and Amy had stopped fluffing the cushions for fear of it. The mattress, despite being turned every 6 months, was limp with old-fashioned steel springs beginning to press hard into the thin linen lining. There were linens in the hall closet, never used. The cabinets were all empty besides basic metal pans and a huge cast iron pot that looked like someone's Halloween joke. She couldn't even lift the thing. There were no appliances. No stove, no microwave, not even modern light fixtures. Amy usually kept the curtains open to have bright light to shine in, leaving the half-burnt candles that littered several scones around the walls untouched. Yes, candles. Mr. Potter must have been an odd one, even when he was actually around. Who used candles to light an apartment, especially one in such a ritzy place? The guy had to be loaded. Apartment 13 was always a source of juicy conspiracy theories and gossip. Everyone who cleaned there left fascinated by the mystery. Amy whistled as she unlocked the door, using a key instead of the more common digital swipe card or keypad that the others' doors had upgraded to years before. Which was another thing. The apartment didn't have a security system, not even a deadbolt. For a rich guy who could afford an apartment in this part of New York and never even visit it, he wasn't worried about anyone stealing his stuff. Amy looked around and found herself smiling. Not like there was much to steal, unless any of the trinkets were worth something. With forceful cheer, Amy opened the thick drapes that covered the wide windows and got down to work, music ringing loud in her ears. Harry stepped from the flames directly into the apartment and heard someone singing. He glanced around, brow furrowed. He stood in a large living room, clean but obviously old furniture spaced sparsely across wooden floors. A large glass cabinet faced him, and he could see hundreds of tiny figures closed inside, their crystal surfaces gleaming. Gleaming. Harry looked again, the singing distant and discordant as his eyes narrowed. Everything was clean, too clean for an abandoned place, and there was someone inside it who could most definitely not hold a tune, belting out lyrics to some song he did not recognize. The cleaning contract. Harry relaxed, remembering Griffith's words, and suddenly extremely grateful that whomever was there had not been in the room when he came in. He did not want to have to deal with whoever was here and explain his presence. He should be able to check out the place and leave before they knew he was here. He closed his eyes slightly and focused, reaching out to feel for the presence of any wards that might linger on the place. There was barely a trace of magic, hovering around the door jamb of the entranceway. Harry turned and marched to it, looking over the faint wards. Some wards, those that had a physical tie to objects like wardstones or carved wooden runes, could last centuries without a recharge, depending on the strength of the creator and the method used. The wards of the temple in Heliopolis, bathed in centuries of blood and ritual, had lasted a millennium, far after the stone within began to crumble. But the usual wards for home protection, with no such ties, and usually set up by only a single witch or wizard, sometimes only lasted mere days. If done by a team of professionals, a year. And every year they would need to be recharged, the magic stoked like a fire back to full blast, their purpose reaffirmed. Around the door jamb, the last traces of old wards only lingered in 3 runes carved into the wooden molding on each side and above the entrance. It was a simple setup, but would have been very effective in its prime. Sirius could set up his own wards later. Harry only reached out and touched one of the runes, letting some of his own power slip free and bring the flickering web of spellwork to life in a series of glimmering streams of light that stretched across the door, then streamed across the walls and around the room, before disappearing further into the apartment. Basic ward spells activated that would alert any wizard on the premises to an intruder. Sirius would probably leave that alone. It could be useful. Harry looked over the ward structure and sighed. It would probably take Sirius hours on his own to build up the faded wards to be worth much. His spark of power had flooded what was already there, but that wasn't much. But then again, Sirius would have plenty of time if he planned to stay here with Hannah. His godfather would probably be relieved to have something to do. With a resolved smile, Harry turned and took a few steps back into the apartment. Only then did he realize the singing had stopped, and around the open door across from him, a tall woman entered, pushing a metal cart ahead of her, eyes bored. A muggle woman. An obviously muggle woman, with the electronic music player hooked to her shirt, microphones hanging limply from one shirt pocket. Why in Merlin's name had his great uncle whoever hired a muggle cleaner? Her eyes met his, widened, and her frame jerked to a halt. Then she yelled. "Who the hell are you?" Amy yelped, her heart racing as she stood stock-still, the empty kitchen at her back. A teenager stood by the door, dressed in a distinctly odd assortment of clothes. What looked like business slacks and a nice dress shirt, but covered with a long, loose coat that resembled a bathrobe of all things if the material didn't look so stiff. Probably to hide whatever he's planning to steal. Amy thought snidely and hitched one hand on her hip even as the other, hidden by the cart, reached for the phone tucked in her apron pocket. The boy blinked at her, looking as shocked to see her as she was him, which made sense if he had cased the place and knew no one lived there. Probability was expecting an easy mark. Will, this was not his lucky day. Amy spoke again, one finger pressing into her phone on the emergency button that would contact the police. Something she insisted on having with how much she traveled alone. She expected to feel it vibrate. It didn't. She pushed it harder as she continued to meet the boy's now blank stare. He looked almost like a statue, he was so still. She risked a quick glance down and saw that her phone had somehow died. It had been fully charged only an hour ago, just like her iPod, which had also died on her just moments before, to her extreme annoyance. The sound of a quiet voice brought her head up as the teen spoke, piercing green eyes locked on her. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I did not know when this place was scheduled to be cleaned." Amy stiffened. The nerve. "I expect not," she snapped. She had to be at least 10 years older than the thief. Maybe he would just leave on his own and not argue if she made a fuss. "I'm calling the police right now," she bluffed. The boy seemed to freeze even further, then cast a look around before locking his gaze on hers with a frown. "There's a telephone here." "I have my cell," she snapped, and the boy's face cleared. "Oh, there's no need. This is my place." Amy fought the urge to roll her eyes. Did he seriously expect to get away with that? Yeah, right. She folded her arms. "Where's your key, then?" She smiled triumphantly when the boy only stared at her, and when he didn't answer, continued. "Leave now, and you might be gone by the time the cops get here. Go find someone else to rob." To her surprise, the boy only remained standing. He looked truly perplexed and raised his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I'm not here to steal anything. This is my place." Amy did roll her eyes this time. Really, it was too much. What was wrong with kids these days? They think all adults turn stupid if given an innocent look. Try again. The teenager folded his arms, his frame stiffening. Abruptly, the innocent look faded away, leaving behind a cool annoyance that immediately put her on edge. She edged slightly behind her cart, ready to grab the Clorox spray. It would be killer in the eyes if he came towards her. Instead of moving, he only spoke in a low, dangerous tone. "I respect you for attempting to protect the valuables in this place, but I am not a thief. My name is Harry Potter, and this place is mine. Call your boss, look at the client name. Should be a Potter. If you absolutely must have proof to not submit this to the authorities, I will gather it and deliver it to whomever holds the cleaning contract." "McAllister Cleaning." Amy mumbled, eyes widening at the sound of the teen's name. Surely he wouldn't know who the owner was enough to toss out his name. But he was just a boy. Where was the older Mr. Potter, and why wasn't an adult with the teen in any case? And how did he get inside? She always locked the door behind her. Amy ran her eye over the boy again, brow furrowed in thought. He was dressed odd. Maybe he was older than he looked, and he had a distinctly British accent. Perhaps he was here on some sort of vacation. If Mr. Potter lived in Britain, that would explain why he was never around. "Where are your parents?" Amy finally questioned, at a loss. The black-haired teen looked away from her for the first time since she had walked in the room. She felt a shiver go down her spine, and could have swore she felt a flare of electricity crackle through the room. The boy sighed, long and drawn out and weary. Amy blinked. She was so glad Mr. Potter was back. He was a bit young, sure, but this apartment was too nice to be left to waste. She could not wait to tell the others she had met the owner. Erica would be so jealous. This would fuel the office gossip for weeks. Amy smiled brightly. "It's so nice to meet you, Mr. Potter." I don't know what came over me. Oddly, confusion furrowed her brow, but then she tossed it off. She couldn't look like an idiot in front of a client, no matter how young. "You surprised me. I clean this place once a month, the first Monday at 6 a.m. sharp. If this needs to be moved, just contact McAllister's." She jostled in her pocket, pulled out a business card, and placed it on a nearby table. "That's our contact number. We hope you have been satisfied with our work so far. Also, you really ought to update your furniture." Wait, where had the last came from? Amy clicked her mouth shut, confusion washing over her again. She was rambling. She did not ramble to clients. In fact, she tried not to speak to them at all. The boy didn't look happy. Instead, he only looked resigned. "Thank you. An older man, my godfather, and his, wife will be setting up here in a few days. I only came to make sure things are in order. I'm sure they will decorate as they please." Amy tilted her head, wishing her brain wasn't so foggy. It sounded decidedly odd, but it was none of her business. Why would a boy be finding a place for his godfather to stay? Why hadn't he come instead? She looked around blankly before shaking her head with a frown. "Right. Once again, sorry to disturb you. I'm finished here, unless you need anything." She looked at him expectantly, but the teen moved aside, his green eyes once more locking with her own before flickering away. Amy quickly walked to the door. As she opened it, the boy suddenly spoke. "What was your name?" Amy hesitated, glancing back. Amy Fletcher, she said softly, feeling as if she was forgetting something important. Mr. Potter nodded sharply. Thank you. She waved a hand and quickly exited, and with an abrupt internal decision, decided she was taking the rest of the day off. She felt distinctly off kilter. Harry groaned aloud, raising his eyes to the ceiling. A muggle. What on earth had the man been thinking, hiring muggle cleaners to clean a wizard's apartment? Obviously, the man hadn't been living in the place, but still, it was ridiculous. Then again, Dylan had mentioned how rare house elves were in the States, so perhaps it was a cultural thing as well. Maybe there were no magical cleaning businesses to choose from. He hated that he had to place a confundus charm on her, too, especially after having obviously fried the woman's music player and phone when he activated the remainder of the wards. He resolved, now that he knew her name, to deposit a substantial tip to her at her business in the mail. Maybe Hermione would know how much such things cost. He needed to talk to Griffin about how the Pungo Lake Pack had made their electronics work in more detail. The place had obviously been warded, but they had a working TV and microwave, as well as electricity in several places. Perhaps it was only the initial activation of wards that caused issues. But if Hannah was going to be here with Sirius, she would probably want some basic amenities. A sudden thought occurred to him. The house in Condonin had had electricity before Sirius helped install wards there, and nothing had been fried. But then again, the appliances had been all old and gas-powered, not electric, and the boys had not yet had a TV. The phone in the house had been a corded one, not a wireless cell. Harry had no idea what that meant. Obviously, there must be some exceptions to magic's scrambling effects on muggle technology. As if he didn't have enough to worry about, now he had to figure out how to outfit a wizarding place to make a muggle comfortable. And he had to get back to Durmstrang before he was missed. With a last look around, Harry flamed directly to Hallamsund, expecting to find Sirius and Hannah eating a lunch he could scarf down as well. Instead, he was met with the extremely unpleasant sight of Hannah and Rick squaring off in his living room, their shouts echoing in the room as they hurled insults between them. Bloody hell. You lying bitch. Rick's voice echoed around the room as he hurled the insult towards an irate Hannah, who paled. Sirius, standing behind her, stepped forward, his wand clenched in one fist with angry intent. Mike, standing to the side, was shaking his head as he looked around the room and was thus the only one to spot Harry where he stood. The man began to open his mouth to speak, but Hannah beat him to it, her voice low and fervent. What I did was wrong. I said I was sorry before, but now that you are being a complete arse about it, I'm not so sorry anymore. Rick snarled, but his eyes had gone to Sirius now, and the wand he held. When he spoke, it was with one side of his lip curled up in a sneer. Should have known you were an idiot already working with James, but this proves it, being duped by a James hired whore. Sirius, already angry face went apoplectic. When the black-haired man raised the long, slender white wand in his tight fist, Harry finally acted. Enough. Sirius froze. Hannah and Rick both turned to face him where Harry stood, his angry green eyes locked on the two men. Enough, Harry repeated, feeling a headache growing behind his eyes as he spoke. Sirius, holster the wand. Rick, Hannah, back off. Mike, what is going on here? Last I knew, the both of you were at James' compound. Mike's shoulders tensed, and his face became tight, focusing completely on Harry. We came right away. James, his lackey, most of his officials, they all disappeared. Some grunt gave us all a message that the government is onto us and that we were to scatter. All the computers were fried, most of the paperwork gone or destroyed. We were locked out of the main rooms within the hour, herded about like cattle. I thought it best to come here, tell you what was going on. That and— Mike paused, glancing towards Hannah with distrust. Then he lifted his chin. Rick found something on their computers. We didn't know what to do with it, were hoping to find more, but didn't get the chance. Rick folded his arms. I'll tell you, Harry, all about it, but not in front of her. Harry turned to Sirius and saw the older wizard had wrapped one arm around Hannah's shoulders, holding the muggle woman close. Sirius, Harry said softly, and saw his godfather's scowl deepen. But the man only nodded and pulled Hannah from the room, the woman sending one last venomous glance back towards where Rick and Mike stood. Harry threw up a general silencing charm around the wide room, then focused his gaze on the one steel boy who had never accepted him. "What did you find?" Rick straightened. "James and his team of scientists have been working on something. They called it Pub, but I figure that's a code name of sorts. It's some kind of anti-magic compound. They had a breakthrough thanks to your precious godfather, and James brought the formula to some hound guy in New York who works in manufacturing. Last I was able to tell, this guy, Wilson, was making the stuff en masse and sending it out. I don't know what it does or what they plan on using it for, which is why we didn't contact you sooner. And now James is gone." Harry slowly fell into a chair, rubbing his forehead with stiff fingers. Everything was beginning to spiral out of control. His brilliant idea of working with the hounds, of trying to find common ground, was a disaster. And now the muggles might have something that could make matters far worse for wizard kind. Harry slowly stood again, shaking his head. "All right, is that all?" Mike and Rick shared a glance, but both nodded their heads. Harry began to speak, changing his plans as he did so. "I found Sirius and Hannah a place to stay, away from here, as this place is not safe for either of them. It also just so happens to be in New York, despite what you think." Harry pinned Rick with a hard stare. "Hannah has no love for James or what she did for him, and she can be extremely useful to us. While they are there, I'll have Hannah track down Wilson." Rick opened his mouth to disagree, but Harry cut him off. "Quiet. If this compound is a weapon, then we are already too late if it's already been moved around. But we still need to know what kind of damage it can do, and we have no time to waste. I am expected to be at another magical school at this very minute, and instead have been stuck traveling around so much I'm beginning to grow weak, and my friend can only make so many excuses for me. For now, you two will be taken to Australia. Visit with the boys. Rick, you get to explain yourself to Care and Tiny." The older man looked mutinous at the very idea, but he jerked his chin in a nod. Harry let out a rough sigh, casting his gaze towards the ceiling. "Let me take them first." By the time Harry had taken Sirius and Hannah to the New York apartment, given them enough money from Gringotts to begin purchasing Muggle appliances, and setting more base wards with Sirius, several hours had passed, and Harry was running low on mental energy. He hadn't eaten in what felt like days, and the vast amount of power he held was straining out of his control. He had barely had a single night's rest to recover from the events of yesterday before today's problems were thrown in his lap. He wanted to return to Durmstrang and sleep, preferably for a very, very long time. So perhaps he could be forgiven for not remembering to check ahead when he flamed Mike and Rick directly into the living room of the house in Condon. And again, he was heralded by a woman's shout, only this time it was not angry. It was scared, witless. Care jumped up from where he had been sitting on their couch, eyes wide, as his girlfriend's shrieks died away, and she looked at the three men in front of them with shocked eyes. Bloody hell. She doesn't know anything yet. Harry fought the urge to moan. He looked at Care instead. How serious is this with her? He gestured towards her with a hand that shook slightly with exhaustion. Care raised his chin and stepped in front of the woman. "Why? And what the hell are you guys doing here?" Rick was laughingly softly, which was definitely not a good response judging by Care's expression. But then again, there was something oddly funny about teleporting into a room where your older brother was making out with a woman who knew nothing about magic. Harry sighed. "Because I can wipe her memory and save us a lot of trouble." Janice Carnelly, Care's girlfriend, gasped behind him as Harry continued. "Or she can sit there while I explain to you what's going on and get out of here, leaving you to explain to her what's going on." Care did not move a muscle. "I'm going to marry her." Janice gasped again, and her head popped around to look up into Care's freckled face. "What?" she breathed. Care grimaced. "I have the ring, but I wanted to ask your father first." Janice jumped to her feet and barreled into him, forgetting entirely about all the eyes locked on them. "Yes, yes, yes, yes." The woman gasped, peppering Care's face with kisses. Harry looked towards a grinning Mike and Rick and sighed. "I guess that answers that one." After explaining Rick and Mike's presence, Harry also ended up staying for the long explanation to Janice about the existence of magic, the formation of the hounds, and the various anti-muggle and anti-magic movements that were brewing around the world. But he stayed mostly because while she was listening, Janice insisted on cooking, and Harry was hungry enough to eat a cow live and kicking. It went relatively well. But then again, Janice had had men teleport right in front of her in a ring of fire. It didn't get much more believable than that. But she seemed to take it all in stride, and he could see that she was finally understanding how the Steel Boys came to be in Australia and just how Harry was able to travel so easily between Britain and Cardonin. When it began to wind down, and Harry saw the looks passing between Rick and the other Steel Boys, Harry stood to leave. His brothers would need to work it all out between themselves as well, and he no longer had the energy to listen to another argument. 1 week. Harry said simply, and all eyes flickered to him. I'll be back in 1 week. Mike, if you want to come with me, we will go to New York and this Wilson fellow. Not sure what we will find, but I can use someone who has been around James more. You might catch something I do not. Why not me? Rick butted in, eyes narrowed. Harry simply stared at him. Because Hannah is in New York, and I think it's best you two stay separated by an ocean or two. Rick scowled, but let it go. Mike nodded. I'll be ready. Harry gave them a nod, and with a relieved smile, jumped through Phoenix Flame one last time for the day, and for the second time in a row, fell straight into bed. The loud banging on the door woke Harry up from a deep slumber. He cracked a lid, squinting through the dim light cast by Fox to peer at the door. Harry, Hermione. In here. Harry mumbled and began to sit up. He was surprised, however, when not only his friend but Griffin and Dylan entered as well. Hermione rushed to his side, her eyes concerned. Are you all right? You weren't here earlier. We were supposed to go to dinner together in the dining room. Everyone asked where you were. Her hand, squeezing his, sent another, though directly to him. They are suspicious, Harry. Griffin especially. I tried to tell them you were in the library, but Dylan went there and looked. I think they know you left the mountain. Harry blinked at her rapid thoughts, then smiled sheepishly, looking up at the faces of the Academy wizards. Sorry, I lost track of time. I went down to the lower levels, where the potion laboratories are. There is another exit that leads to the frozen lake. Harry had learned both facts on an early exploration of the mysterious school. He only hoped he would be believed, for he honestly barely believed himself. Such a trip wouldn't take so many hours, nor leave him so tired. But by Merlin, he was just too tired to lie properly. I see. Griffin murmured and began to back away, gesturing for Dylan to precede him. We will see you in the morning, maybe. They didn't believe him. Harry smiled slightly. Most likely. Griffin nodded solemnly and left. Hermione leaned into him, shaking her head. You've got to quit disappearing all day. You told me you would be back for lunch. Harry sighed. I was supposed to be. Everything went wrong again. With a grimace, Harry told her all he had done, along with Rick and Mike's discoveries. At the end of it, Hermione leaned into him and held him loosely, her breath warm against his neck. The sensation suddenly made him a lot less tired. I'm sorry, Harry. I'll let you sleep. Hermione backed away, her hand lingering a moment on his, and then she was gone. Harry fell back onto the bed and added yet another problem to work through. How to tell Hermione how he felt about her. Zach Griffin paced his room. He knew the boy was lying, and had a strong suspicion even the boy had known how thin his excuse was. Miss Granger seemed willing enough to cover for her friend, but she was a little too eager. They were hiding something, the both of them, and he was supposed to be monitoring Harry. But worst of all, Griffin knew for a fact that the boy's phoenix had been in his rooms most of the day. Unless the boy had indeed been hiding inside Durmstrang somewhere, doubtlessly up to no good, Harry Potter had a way to leave the school without the use of his phoenix. Without apparition, as it was warded, and without flu, as that was closed except for inter-school travel. How was he doing it? And how long had he been able to do so? And what, exactly, was Harry Potter doing leaving the school so often? Griffin sat on his bed, head aching at the questions that had no answers. He only hoped, deep in his soul, that the boy knew what he was doing. He desperately hoped the boy was no longer involved with the hounds, especially James and his insane sect, because he really did not want to be the one to tell Harry that Hybrid had their eyes trained directly at him, for he personally knew how that felt. Guys! The loud call brought Hermione and Harry's heads up from where they sat in a quiet corner of the library. Dylan was hurrying towards them, his eyes wide. Guys, check this out. The boy slammed a large paper down in front of them, pointed at the large print of the first page article. Crouch SR, found murdered, Hermione gasped. That's one of our judges for the challenges. He worked in the British ministry. Dylan nodded rapidly, sinking into a chair. Hermione's eyes roved the article, reading at a rapid pace. Dylan turned to Harry, gesturing with a hand across his throat. I'm reading between the lines, and it doesn't look good. He wasn't just killed, he was slaughtered. Hermione finished with a mutter, raising her eyes. Why? Harry took the article from her, then sighed. He put away a lot of Death Eaters, even his own son. I researched him when Draco, Blaise, and Neville were looking into the Wisengamot. I imagine there were a lot of people who held grudges, and their family. Hermione slowly nodded with a frown. Dylan sighed. Uncle Zack told me some guy called Bagman is taking his place on the panel and didn't seem to have a high opinion of him. So I don't think it improves our chances any. Hermione glared at the boy. Dylan, the man just died. The tall teen shrugged with a sideways smile. Got to keep your eyes on the prize, Hermione. Hermione sniffed, but her glare faded as she stared down at the table morosely. Harry reached out and gently touched her hand with his, not sending words but only a general feeling of comfort. It's all right, he murmured, and Hermione's smile returned a little. Dylan looked between them, then got a gleam in his eyes. So, Harry, you have a date yet? The Yule Ball is only days away. Harry grimaced, and his hand fell back to his side. He stared down at the table with glaring eyes. No, Dylan barked out a laugh, shaking his head. Dude, you have seriously got to ask some girl already. What are you waiting for exactly? Harry stood suddenly, flipping his books closed. He avoided Hermione's eyes and turned. I'll see you later. He mumbled and disappeared among the stacks before either could speak. He didn't want to ask some other girl. He didn't want to dance, and he really didn't want to worry about some silly ball when he was supposed to be figuring out how to interrogate some hound in New York the very day after it. So, rumors are true. The cool voice made him stop in his tracks. Harry turned, narrowing his eyes at the willowy, silver-haired woman who looked at him with a cool expression. What? Harry hissed, and dread coiled inside him, reacting to his boiling emotion. Fleur de Lacre raised one slender shoulder. You have no date. Harry scowled. I don't have a partner for one dance, he countered, and she raised an elegant brow. I see. Then, perhaps, you will be open for negotiations, she asked, a hint of a smile at her lips. Harry wanted to throw the offer right back in her face. He remembered the burly Slytherin from Hogwarts, Warrington, and how the boy had smiled openly at Fleur. I figured you already found someone by now, he asked suspiciously, and Fleur laughed. I ave, but such things can be fluid. I can convince I am to let me, what do you English say, off the ook. Harry blinked in surprise at her answer, and that she would take for granted that one guy would not mind being foisted off for another. But then again, he had seen the Veela's effect on men. Doubtless, the boy would jump at the suggestion if it was her idea. Harry leaned against the shelf behind him, crossing his arms. What do you get out of this? He asked softly, and Fleur smiled in triumph. One dance, Monsieur Potter. Yours in mine, and the opportunity to test my magic against yours where you cannot escape me. Harry narrowed his eyes. You mean you're going to try your best to enthrall me, and this is supposed to make me happy? Fleur's smile was deadly on her beautiful face. I assure you, I can make you most happy if you will let me. Harry shivered at the tone of her voice and fought down the desire to shuffle his feet. I don't trust you, Harry told her honestly, and Fleur sighed. Oh, that is fine. I am Veela after all. You are not supposed to trust me. Only, she stepped closer, too close, and Harry could feel his skin heat. Obey me, she whispered, and this time Harry could not contain the shiver. He jerked away and took a step back while Fleur laughed. You may be able to resist my magic, but you are still a boy. One dance, and I will prove it to you. Harry frowned at her, but he knew he had already made the decision. It was only one dance. Fine, he said sharply, and Fleur held out her hand. Shake on it, she said sweetly, and Harry stared at her pale skin and slender fingers as if it was a snake about to strike him. Then he took her warm hand in his and shook it firmly once. Jalmer knelt before his lord, the golden mask obscuring his face, the obsidian stone around his neck hot from its inherent storm of magic. My lord, Jalmer whispered, and the Dark Lord bid him to rise. When he did, he quickly saw that he was not the only one present in the room. Rosier, his face bare and mouth twisted in a grin, leant against a chair with reckless grace. Another stood beside him, one Jalmer had long thought imprisoned or dead. Crouch Jr's eyes were locked on him, wide and staring, his face pale as a ghost, blue veins spidering across his forehead. As H. Jelmer met his gaze, the man's tongue flicked out like a snake's, spider-quick, and his eyes gleamed with madness. H. Jelmer felt disgust curling inside him. First Rosier, now Crouch, both of them long past rational. Are the plans in place? The Dark Lord hissed, and H. Jelmer turned to bow his head once more. Yes, my lord. Good. The red-eyed man hissed, before his gaze fixed on Crouch and Rosier. We are ready, then. The potion, given on a cut, should make him malleable enough for us. It is in the bag. H. Jalmer glanced at the velvet bag by his lord's feet, then glanced up. When do you wish me to retrieve him? Voldemort laughed softly, anticipation radiating from him. The early morning of your tournament's next challenge. When we are done with him, I'll let you return his body to all the cattle who flock to watch the spectacle. It will be more than an appropriate way to announce my return. Of course. H. Elmer whispered, and felt excitement flood his own veins. Days, that's all it would be. Only days, and he would no longer be forced to hide. Days, and his master would step into the light and claim his throne. And the first to fall would be the boy who claimed to have defeated him, Harry James Potter. For once, H. Jalmer did not mind when Rosier burst into peals of excited laughter. To be continued. The Darkness Between the Stars review, please. Tilde *.